The Middle East is a great town, and I've always said that, but it's a very old part of the world. It's old, it's complicated, it's not easy to understand, but my approach to understanding the history of the place is to establish the cause and effect in the correct order. I'd hate to get things backwards, and it's easy to get the cause and effect all turned around.
When did your awareness awaken?
October 7th, the Palestinian genocide, on the 7th, yes. That started on the 7th.
So the genocide that started on the 7th, to be clear,
yes,
was which one? Which one are you talking about?
The Israelis were committing genocide against the Palestinians.
On the 7th?
Yes.
So the biggest question mark in my mind about the 1948 Arab-Israeli War is who started it? Who is the aggressor here? Did the Zionist Jews begin an ethnic cleansing operation and then the Arab armies invaded to rescue the Palestinians from the Jews? Or did the Palestinian Arabs start fighting the Jewish community and then the Zionist forces responded to the Arab violence? And did the surrounding countries invade because they just couldn't stand the idea of a Jewish country in the Islamic world? These are the variables that I'm trying to sort out right now. The 1948 war really should be thought of as two wars, a civil war and a conventional war. The civil war was the Zionist forces battling the Arab militias and conquering the Arab towns and villages within Palestine, and that all started November 29th, 1947, the same day that the UN voted to partition the land. Now, the conventional war was the Zionist forces beating back the invasion from the surrounding Arab countries, and that started May 15th, 1948, the same 24-hour period that David Ben-Gurion declared statehood and the British military began their scheduled exit from Palestine. So as the British armies are leaving, the Arab armies are invading. Now, one of the fallacies in history is that it often tells you what happened without really explaining why it happened. Well, what I like about Benny Morris's book is that the reader comes away with some knowledge of who all the parties involved are. What are their wants and needs? What are their belief systems, their ideologies? And those are elements that are rather absent in Ilan Pappe's book. That's just not what his book was about. Ilan Pappe is interested in the detailing of the Nakba and the removal of the Palestinian Arabs. Now, in the Benny Morris book, you get to learn about some of the cultural traits that distinguish the Muslim Arabs from the Zionist Jews. And to be clear, none of the following statements are insults. They're also not compliments, only description. Well, as it happened, the Zionists were more modern, more industrial, more politically minded. They built infrastructure, hospitals, universities. They even had sports teams. And they went to the trouble of making sure that all their people were educated and literate in Hebrew. And they improved the territory. It was the Zionist colonies in Haifa that revitalized the seaport, which caused the entire Haifa region to blossom. And that was a net benefit for everybody. The Zionists were organizing a society so that when the time came, they would be capable of governing themselves and they could prove to the world that they could be a country. Because the world was becoming more nation-oriented. Fewer empires, more nation states, and Jewish people are looking around thinking, other people have a country. Why can't we? And 99% of the Middle East was Islamic, there can't be one slice of Jewish territory. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like this, but it was jump ball for the land of Palestine. The place had not been a country since antiquity. Also keep in mind that they had been kicked around for like a bazillion years, and the Holocaust just happened, so they don't really have any place else to go. So this was their shot, and that's a lot of motivation. Now, the Palestinian Arabs, on the other hand, were more agrarian, less industrial, more connected through family, tribe, and religion, less aware of themselves as a nation or a political unit. They were big on spiritual leadership and they're Islamic scholars, but not much in the way of political leadership. Now, that's a major contrast with the Zionist Jews, of whom 90% were socialist and somewhere in the realm of agnostic to atheist. Now, so how did each of these communities regard one another? Well, according to the author, the Zionists perceived the Arabs to be interlopers and rivals. And by rivals, I mean rivals to the land. Also, the Zionists felt a certain way about the Arabs, and I take no satisfaction in repeating this, it's just what's in the book, but the Zionists described the Arabs as untrustworthy, backward, lazy, etc. Now, this comes across quite smug to me because the Zionists were perfectly happy to use Arab labor in their factories, in their refineries, yet they looked down on them. And of course, the Palestine Arabs viewed the Zionists as just these strange, dumb infidels, and on multiple occasions they pleaded with the Ottoman Empire and the British administration to halt Jewish immigration, to bar Jewish land purchases, and their idea was that these immigrants were going to come down and Judaize the land. They were going to make it less Islamic.
You're Hamas. Wow. That's a good one. You're what? You're Hamas?
Yes, we're all Hamas.
There were Arab leaders who openly called for Jewish people to be harassed into leaving, and they demanded all of Palestine for the Arabs. Now, there was one Arab leader in particular who said that he would rather Palestine be impoverished and barren for the next 100 years than to share the land with the immigrant Jewish population. Now, there was a ton of threatening rhetoric back then that promised a violent reaction to the partition plan, and curiously, Ilan Pappe is very quiet about this in his book. There were Arab leaders who said that Jews everywhere are the enemy and no more Jewish immigration. And if the partition plan is implemented, the blood will flow in the Middle East. There will never be peace. We will murder, wreck, and ruin everything to stop a Jewish state. Fight with aggression and no mercy. And the lives of Jews in Arab countries are also jeopardized. Now, that last part is predictive because not long after, there were pogroms and riots against Jewish people in the surrounding Arab countries. It's important to remember that this messaging is not coming from just some guy on a street corner. These quotes are attributed to statesmen, leaders in the Muslim world. And it was the commander of the Arab Liberation Army, Fawzi al-Kawukji, who planned to expel the Jews from the Arab parts of Palestine, confine them to a small area, and have them live under armed guard and supervision. Now, he came up with that one back in January of 1948. So from the fall of 1947 into the spring of 1948, the Jews were being attacked by Arab mobs, their settlements were being assaulted, they were fearing and anticipating an invasion by a real army from the surrounding Arab countries, but up until that time, the Zionists generally fought defensively, and the balance of the fighting actually favored the Arabs. But beginning in April of 1948, the Zionists started to go on the offensive, and they had a policy called Plan D. It's discussed at length in both of the books. Well, from then on, they're not just repelling attacks and defending Jewish settlements, they were attacking Arab towns and villages, and there was plenty of bitter fighting and civilian Arab casualties that shouldn't be denied, but it's also important to admit that the Arabs initiated the violence. But what was conquering these Arab villages all about? I mean, there's not that many things more callous than driving people out of their homes, especially ordinary folk, people that are non-combatants, people that didn't ask to be part of a war, most of them anyway. So this was a terrible time for the Arabs, and this is what people refer to as the Nakba. However, there was a depressing logic to it that was understood by both sides, even back in those days. If those Arab towns and villages had been left intact, they would have become enemy bases by the invading Arab armies. If the Zionists didn't capture those places, the Arabs would have. And then the Arabs would have been in an even better position to attack places like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and other Jewish population centers. So a large number of the towns and villages that were sacked by the Zionist forces were located in the northern part of the country, closer to the Syria and the Lebanon border. Well, the information that the Haganah had was that the invading Arab armies would be entering Palestine from the north, through Lebanon and Syria. So the idea was to block the invasion. Now, it's grim stuff, but the Jews are trying to win this thing. They're not trying to lose a war. They're trying to prove to the world that they can hang on to a country.